When the Police burst onto the music scene in 1977, they didn't look like the kind of band that would implode. Charismatic, edgy, and tight as a unit, they fused punk energy with reggae grooves and instantly caught the world's attention. Within just a few years, they weren't just rising stars, they were global icons. By 1983, their album Synchronicity had catapulted them to a level of fame few bands ever reach. Headlines were calling them the biggest rock band in the world. But behind the scenes, a different story was unfolding. One filled with friction, egos, and growing resentment. Their music might have sounded effortless, but the process was anything but. Sting, Andy Summers, and Stewart Copeland weren't childhood friends or longtime collaborators. They were three strong-willed individuals thrown together by ambition and timing. And while that tension helped produce some of the most electrifying music of the early 80s, it also created a volatile chemistry that was hard to contain.
Hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more untold Hollywood history content.
From the very beginning, the band's dynamic was more combustible than collaborative. Their creative process was often a battleground, where winning a musical idea sometimes felt more important than collaboration itself. It was this spark, this need to outdo each other, that powered their sound. But the same fuel that drives a rocket can also destroy it.
Do they start to get resentful that you're the writer, that you're the front man?
Yeah, I was like a cuckoo in the nest, you know. They didn't really know what they were taking on.
Yeah.
Even at the height of their fame, the cracks were visible. Rumors of arguments, tantrums, and walkouts followed them on every tour. Fans saw three performers in sync on stage, but off stage, it was a different story, one the public was only beginning to glimpse. And as their success skyrocketed, so did the pressure. With each hit single came higher stakes, and with each sold-out show came deeper fractures in their fragile alliance. But as we'll see in the next section, the Police didn't hide their issues behind closed doors. In fact, they often put their dysfunction front and center for the world to see. Section 2. A band that thrived on conflict.
And it was originally bossa nova.
Until somebody came along.
So you messed it up. You don't have to put on the red light. You play.
Most bands keep their problems behind the scenes, not the Police. Their arguments weren't just whispered in dressing rooms, they were front-page material. From studio sessions to live interviews, the tension between Sting, Stewart Copeland, and Andy Summers wasn't just noticeable, it was the band's unofficial fourth member. If anything, their dysfunction became part of their identity. Andy Summers once admitted that they would deliberately mess with each other while recording, pulling pranks, sabotaging takes, and pushing each other's buttons just to see what would happen. In his own words, "We continue playing tricks on one another, trying to fuck each other up." It wasn't just for laughs. These antics added an aggressive edge to their music, a rawness that gave their sound its bite. But that constant pressure cooker came at a cost. The band's chemistry was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it made their music tense, tight, and unpredictable. On the other, it left them constantly on the brink of collapse. Where other groups leaned on brotherhood or shared vision, the Police ran on ego and competition. And when you've got three alphas trying to steer the ship, it's only a matter of time before someone jumps overboard or gets pushed. Their interviews from that era read more like therapy sessions. Snide remarks, passive-aggressive digs, and thinly veiled insults became standard fare. What most artists tried to hide, the Police wore like armor. The press loved it. Fans were intrigued. But for the band members themselves, it was exhausting. Back in the studio, things weren't any better. Arguments would flare up over creative decisions, song arrangements, or even who got more space in the mix. What should have been a collaborative process became a battlefield, and recording sessions often ended with people storming out, or worse, recording in separate rooms just to avoid face-to-face confrontations. Despite it all, they managed to keep the show going, at least in public. Night after night, they took the stage, and performed as though nothing was wrong. But beneath the lights and thunderous applause, the foundation was cracking. And by the time Synchronicity rolled around, that fracture was about to split wide open. Section 3. Synchronicity, the ironic final hit. Synchronicity wasn't just the Police's most successful album, it was their breaking point. Released in 1983, it launched them into a stratosphere few bands ever reach. The singles dominated the charts. The tours sold out worldwide. On paper, everything was perfect. But the reality? Synchronicity was recorded in fragments, not harmony. The title might have suggested unity, but behind the studio doors, it was anything but. By this point, the band couldn't even stand to be in the same room. Each member recorded their parts separately, overdubbing tracks in isolation to avoid clashes that had become too common, too explosive. What should have been a collaborative victory lap turned into a cold, clinical operation. The creative process had officially become a series of compromises, workarounds, and damage control. Drummer Stewart Copeland didn't sugarcoat it. He told Musician magazine that by then, the only connection they had was musical, and even that was hanging by a thread. Now, the only thing that the three of us have in common is on stage and on that album, he said. That's the only place we achieve synchronicity. It was an admission that while their music sounded tighter than ever, the personal relationships were completely unraveling. In a last-ditch effort to hold things together, they even consulted legendary Beatles producer George Martin. His advice may have temporarily calmed the storm, but it didn't change the fact that the band was already spiraling toward a quiet implosion. And for Sting, Synchronicity wasn't a finish line. It was a launch pad to something bigger. For him, the band had peaked. The mountain had been climbed. Their historic performance at Shea Stadium in 1983 felt like a victory lap to the audience. But to Sting, it was something else entirely. He later described that moment as the band's Everest, and once he reached the summit, he didn't see any reason to keep climbing with the same team. That night, in front of tens of thousands of screaming fans, he silently made his decision. He was done. Section 4. While the rest of the world saw a band at its peak, Sting saw something else, an exit sign. Behind the sunglasses, the charisma, and the flawless performances, he was quietly making moves. He had no intention of sticking around to watch the Police slowly burn out. In his mind, the band had done what it came to do, and now it was time to move on. It wasn't just about ego, though there was plenty of that. It was about control. Sting had grown tired of fighting for space in his own songs, tired of making room for what he saw as inferior contributions. In a brutally honest 2022 interview with Mojo, he pulled no punches. My frustration was, I would have written an album's worth of material, but also had to entertain these other songs that were not as good. Then came the killer line. Explaining to someone why their song isn't working is a bit like saying their girlfriend's ugly. It's a very personal thing. As soon as the Synchronicity Tour wrapped, he didn't waste time. He went solo, diving headfirst into a new sound. More jazz, more introspection, more Sting. And while some critics rolled their eyes at the seriousness of his new direction, the move paid off. His solo career brought him awards, acclaim, and the artistic control he'd always craved. No more debates, no more compromises, just Sting, exactly how he wanted to be heard. But even as he moved on, the Police wasn't fully out of the picture. Not yet. There was still unfinished business. And just when it seemed like the book was closed, the band made one last attempt to come back together. Section 6. Reunion Tour. For the money, not the music. By the mid-2000s, it had been 2 decades since the Police had done anything substantial together. They were legendary, but frozen in time. A band remembered more for their fallout than their future. So when they announced a full-scale reunion tour in 2007, jaws dropped. Were they finally putting the past behind them? Was this the start of a second chapter? Not exactly. The 2007-2008 tour was a spectacle. Huge venues, packed crowds, and nostalgic energy that sold out almost instantly. The Police didn't just come back, they dominated. Night after night, they played their biggest hits to thunderous applause, proving that their music had never really faded from public consciousness. But behind the curtain, the same old dynamics were still at play. This wasn't a creative reunion. This was business. The tour grossed over $360 million, making it the third highest grossing tour of all time at that point. It was a juggernaut. But it wasn't born out of friendship or artistic revival. Even Sting admitted it. In an interview with Mojo, he said, "I don't think any grown man can be in a band, actually. A band is a teenage gang. Who wants to be in a teenage gang when you're knocking 70? That wasn't just a reflection. It was a rejection of the very idea of band life. To him, a band was something you outgrew, something that worked when you were young, angry, and hungry, but not when you'd moved on. And in many ways, that summed up the Police perfectly. They were never a band that evolved together. They were a burst of brilliance, intense, chaotic, and unsustainable. The reunion gave fans what they wanted, gave the members a final victory lap, and gave everyone involved a massive payday. But once the last encore was played, it was over. No new music, no comeback album. Just a final bow before disappearing once again.
Hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more untold Hollywood history content.